the Austrian Foundation for Development Research. ÖFSE is the German acronym. In case you do not have any previous acquaintance with us, just let me shortly explain to you what the Austrian Foundation for Development Research is doing. We are a research and information center based here in Vienna, Austria. For the last more than 50 years, we've provided expertise, advice, and educational activities to the Austrian, but also an international audience. One of our long-standing research and working areas has been education for development. And as you might know, in the German-speaking countries, vocational education and training has had a long tradition. And also, we've been engaged in work on that activities. Given our experience, it is also our impression that that as a practice of development policy is currently confronting a number of challenges, one of which, and perhaps the most central one, relates to the challenges related to climate change and what that means for not only basic education, but also education in a vocational training setting. So we thought that it is very timely to critically reflect on the needs and challenges for VET systems to incorporate current challenges given by climate change and other socio-ecological transformation issues. And against this background, I'm very happy that it was possible to organize today's online seminar. So let me particularly thank our keynote speakers, Sasha Ramsarup and also Brescia Ramsarup and also Simon McGrath, and also the other international speakers and also speakers from Austria that have agreed to contribute to today's online seminar. And let me also take the opportunity to thank my colleague Margarita Langthaler for organizing today's conference. And with this, I'm already handing over to her as she will be facilitating today's online seminar. So hopefully, and I'm sure we'll have a very interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to this event. Thank you very much. And over to you, Margarita.
Thank you, Werner, for this introduction. A warm welcome to all of you and a nice afternoon also from my side. My name is Margarita Langthaler. I'm a researcher here with the Austrian Foundation for Development Research, or ÖFSE in the German language, and I'm very happy to be your facilitator this afternoon. I will be doing this together with my colleague Jonas Peintner. Jonas will be doing this facilitation with me tonight. He is mainly in charge of watching the chat and for any other technical issues. So thank you, Jonas. Okay, so here is our program. Our first keynote speaker is Brescia Ramsarup from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. She will be speaking on conceptual issues regarding skills for green and just transitions and what challenges arise from these for vocational education and training. And she will be doing this from a South African, but also from a global point of view. Our next keynote speaker is Simon McGrath from the University of Nottingham, and he will take us into the depth of conceptual issues of vocational education and training, and he will reflect with us on the need to go beyond the orthodoxy of vocational education and training as we happen to know it. Then there will be time for breakout sessions that will allow us to reflect on what we've heard during the keynotes in small groups, and the reflections and discussions of these small groups shall then feed into the panel discussion, which will take place after a coffee break that we have scheduled for 18:15. So in our panel discussions, we have three distinguished panelists: Professor Franz Rauch from the University of Klagenfurt here in Austria, Ms. Kenneth Barrientos from UNESCO UNEVOC, and Ms. Maud Segers from VVOB Education for Development, an international non-profit organization active in developing countries. And after their interventions, there will be the question and answer session where you, a kind audience, will have the possibility to intervene, to ask questions, to make statements. And at 19:20, we will have a short wrap-up and an exchange on the way forward. And at 19:30, we will close the seminar. So this is briefly the program which we will have this afternoon. And now, before we start our first keynote, we would like to ask you to join us to do as a poll. We have prepared this poll for you as a warm-up. Jonas, could you just start the poll, please? We would kindly like to invite you to answer the following question. How can vocational education and training best contribute to ecologically and socially sustainable development? Okay, so we can see here that you voted equally for the second and the third answer, that VET is best contributing by transmitting critical thinking and transformative practices of learning and working, and as well by empowering communities to develop skills for decent work and sustainable livelihoods, but also importantly by providing skills for specific professions, and as well by promoting sustainable attitudes and practices, so green cultures, and also in other ways. So I guess we can also discuss this later on during our seminar. So thank you very much for participating in this poll. And it's now time to introduce our first keynote speaker. I'm very happy to introduce Prisha Ramsarup to you. Prisha is a director at the Center for Researching Education and Labor at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. Her research work focuses on green skill learning pathways. She aims to investigate the nature of learning pathways for sustainable development and the green economy in South Africa, with a view to laying the nexus of two important areas of development, namely work, learning, and sustainable development. She has previously served as Education for Sustainable Development technical advisor to both provincial and national government to support the development of environmental and sustainability education within South Africa's education and training transformation process. So Prisha, the floor is yours.
Hello from Johannesburg. Thank you so much for the invitation, Margarita. And I've enjoyed this working with Margarita and Simon to put together this briefing paper as well as the seminar. So this afternoon, colleagues, Margarita has asked me to share some of the research work that we have been doing in South Africa. I come, like she explained, from a postgraduate research center that researches the relationship between education and work. And we have been involved in a national green skills project in South Africa for the last almost 10 years now, which is a partnership project between 3 universities in South Africa that have been researching green skills learning pathways and all of the various issues around green skills. And I'm going to share some of what we're doing with you this afternoon. In my presentation, what I've chosen to highlight are some of the conceptual challenges that we have been engaging with, and I've pulled them out so that we can contemplate them as we plan how we're going to build and expand a sustainability agenda within VET. So the key argument for this afternoon from me is that the education and training system response to environment and sustainability has been inadequate, ad hoc, fragmented, reactive, and inefficient. I have a strong opinion, as you can see, about it. There have been multiple sites of innovation. There's been almost zero scaling up. So there's been a huge disconnect in how responses have been articulated at different levels of the system, especially in around skills development issues in South Africa and in the multiple international research projects that I've been involved in. Hence, what we'd like to argue is that as VET continues to embrace the transition to a greener economy, there is a need for a much stronger theorization of what is a green economy. and how we understand notions of a green economy. Because what we have found is that without thinking clearly through it, we end up with quite naive and limited adaptive responses. And we'll pick up some of this in the discussion a bit later today. And through this, we hopefully will get a better understanding of the kinds of substantive, transformative, and systemic changes that's actually required in this green transition. Now, VET, as we know, is located at the interface between work, civil society, and the labor market. So it has an important transformative role to play in skills development as well as the development of livelihoods. Now, there's been a recent, and when I say recent, for some people it's a little bit, there's been a reinvigorated interest in sustainability within VET. Even UNESCO and the UNESCO TVET strategy and the work that Ken and her colleagues have been doing they've been attempting to try to upfront the role of sustainability within VET curricula. VET has always looked at relationships between work and learning. This has been the foundation of how VET has operated. A focus on sustainability and researchers working with ideas of bringing sustainability into this relationship between work and learning are arguing strongly, in the work of Spores and other work that Simon and people that we're working with in the VET4 project, we're looking at is what's missing in that relationship between work and learning is living. And VET needs to really start to look at the nexus between living, working, and learning, and how that comes together in how we conceptualize sustainability within VET. Okay. So although the green jobs movement and discussions around green economy can be traced back in the literature to the 1970s, essentially there's been a lot of attention to this transition to a greener economy post the financial crisis of 2008. But often, this transition to a greener economy is represented as a jobs discourse. And many countries, including South Africa, produce green job projections. The figure on the left-hand side on my slide shows a research study in South Africa that actually investigated green jobs in different sectors in the country. And each little man there is reflective of 5,000 jobs, it was predicted at the stage. And if you look at our graph, what it argued is that the most number of jobs in South Africa would be created within natural resource management. So then many countries got involved in this job projections and actually looking at a green job. But the transition to a green economy is much broader and bigger than a jobs discourse. It is fundamentally about the environmental and social challenges that lie at the heart of our society. So when we look at the transition to a greener economy, we are talking about much bigger issues like decent work, well-being, social, economic, and environmental justice. How do we look at issues of inclusion and power relation and justice in the change initiatives that we're actually supporting? When we look and conceptualize change initiatives, who's deciding what kind of transitions are needed? How are different groups involved in decision-making processes? Who's benefiting from these change processes? Who benefits and how are benefits distributed in change processes? So when we start to unpack what lies under the transition to a green economy, it is much bigger and broader than a jobs discourse. And that's the first important thing that we need to remember. Defining green is difficult. And we have to accept that. It's conceptually difficult to do because the question it begs is, so green, does green include blue? The wisdom of the South African government, we have a plan for the green economy and a plan for the blue economy. wise. But those are the kinds of questions that are prompted. Does it include brown? What do we mean when we say something is green? Is it the same as being environmentally friendly? Are we talking about a product or a service being green? If a product is manufactured in a green way, but it's packaged and transported in an unenvironmental way, is it still a green product? Where are the lines and how do we make these kind of decisions? What does that imply for users of a product? And is a user of a product included in how we define green? So defining green is difficult, and it has been a conceptual challenge for people that are researching it and people that are trying to interpret it within education programs. What we are seeing in the literature is that there are three types of green definitions that are starting to emerge. The first one is the social justice worker-centered definition, which makes green contingent on issues of decent work, job quality, addressing poverty, social issues, and it's the kind of center of the just transitions kind of discourse. Then the definition that's focused on renewable energy and energy efficiency and the transition to a low carbon economy that looks at green, at the transition as this movement towards creating energy efficiency and cleaner energy usages. And then there's what people are terming as the more broader environmental definition in how green is interpreted, and that is anything involving environmental protection and quality. So what you're seeing in how people are starting to respond, there are three types of definitions that's starting to emerge in the literature. So now reflecting a little bit about supporting the green transition and what we've actually managed to see here in some of the work that we have been busy with. We come across people, or we come across attempts to actually look at supporting skills for green jobs in different sectors, okay? And training, green skills training for XYZ. But what is often, or what we found in the programs that we have researched, is that often the greening work or the green skills components are conceptualized within very traditional conceptions of production and consumption. So we're talking about skills development for a particular job and the work roles of that job. But the value chain connected that where that job resides has not been interrogated. So you're talking about changing job roles for one particular job, but the whole value chain and the kind of traditional notions of production and consumption, no change has been made. So that's one thing to actually contend with when you're actually looking at. So we're looking at this job. Which jobs are they connected to? Where does it fall in the value chain? You know, which part of the value chain represents hotspots? Who works in those hotspot areas? Those are some of the things that we've had to contend with, because in the real workplace or in reality, you don't get one person with just the skills on their own. Another thing that we've had to look at, when you had to look at it much broader, is that we conceptualize training for a particular job. But the occupational system and how the occupational tasks in the occupational system in that country and how that job is seen in that occupational system doesn't change. So you're designing training programs which are not linking them to occupational systems. Another point that I'd like to raise is that green jobs are not a homogeneous concept. We need to be able to understand and see them as a much more differentiated concept. In the work that we've been doing in South Africa, because it resonates with the South African occupational system, we've been working with the idea of core green jobs, where the job, the purpose, and the processes are green. We've been looking at specialisms in existing occupations, and we've been working with traditional green jobs that won't emerge as a new specialization, but it's the integration. That's one kind of framing that some projects in South Africa have been utilizing to try to understand the greening of work. The second thing that we had to look at and we had to work with is, if you're talking about greening an occupation, what exactly are you talking about greening? The knowledge and the occupational roles. What's the field of knowledge required for this occupation? Are you talking about the materials that the person is working on, or the materials the person's working with? Are we talking about the kinds of goods and services produced by that occupation? Are we talking about the tools and the machinery that's actually being used? So this was just to give you some indication of the kind of conceptual issues that you have to start to think through when you're thinking about a green skills educational initiative. So I think I've made the point that clarifying what a transition to a green economy is going to be is complex. It's surrounded by ambiguity, and it remains a contested terrain, largely dependent on who you're reading and what you're reading. So in some of the work that we have done, we've actually gone back to the work of researchers like Carl Dett, like Fasser and Ferguson, who have all been looking and interrogating discourses of a green economy and actually trying to look. So Carl Dett typology on the left-hand side of my slide is actually developed as a focus on national strategies from the global south. So he's examined green economy strategies and how governments in the global south have been responding to the green economy and tried to characterize. And he makes the very strong argument for political interventions to change structures of economies. Fasser actually tried to characterize green economy activity. And he looked at incrementalist activity that actually uses market-based tools to drive the green economy tradition, and then a more transformative discourse that actually looked at a much more radical view of society's economic and broader developmental objections. And Ferguson and the work that Ferguson has been doing, and he's been using the characterization of weak, transformational, and strong green economy transitions. And he has been arguing that weak and transformational green economies still use GDP as a signifier of socioeconomic development. Whereas the argument that he's trying to build with strong green economy discourse is that we need to move past growth to a post-growth, to embody a post-growth or limited growth agenda, where welfare and things like well-being become a critical indicator. And those of you that are reading people like Rayworth, you can see some of that literature has been picked up. So from these descriptions, we can see, and from these different typologies, you can actually see that this is a much more complex discourse than creating jobs. And it's important that we engage that. And the fact that when we engage a transition to a greener economy, it's actually a huge opportunity to advance both sustainability and social equity. So then, in this transition to a green economy, green skills is an important, and we need skills to be able to transition. That's the argument that every government has been using, okay? Green skills are an enabling factor for the transition to a green economy. There are varied and contested meanings of what green skills are. And we have students that have done whole PhDs trying to unpack what green skills are actually. And on my slide, I've reflected 3 of the most widely utilized definitions of green skills that seem to be used and interpreted. I'll look at the second one. Green skills are the technical skills, knowledge, values, and attitudes needed in the workforce to develop and support sustainable, social, economic, environmental outcomes in business, industry, and community. A very broad definition, but what I want to move to more quickly is how people are actually trying to characterize and conceptualize green skills within their research work. This slide is work that's being done by colleagues at the University of Hong Kong, with work that they're doing across some of the Asian countries, working very much with the greening of TVET. So they're involved in greening TVET curricula for different sectors across a variety of Asian countries. I won't go into it now. But if you look at their typology, what they've been working with is building sustainability mindsets into their curricula as the baseline level. So they've been looking at TVET curricula and looking for opportunities to look at this kind of integration of sustainability mindset. The next level that their typology looks at is generic green skills and generic technological processes. What kind of generic green skills could be integrated into this sector? And then what kind of top-up green skills? And then are there any specializations? So that's one kind of typology that's been emerging, that's been utilized in a formal education and training context, and with a kind of curriculum orientation. This, sorry, colleagues. This slide is representing work that's coming out of the Brookings Institute in New York. And as you can see from this slide, is that they are arguing for green skills to be interpreted as a continuum. And that's important because it's important not to set up an aspirational narrative that's very removed from the ground narrative. And it's hard to see the gap between the two. It's hard to see how to bridge the gap between the two, sorry. And in this continuum, how they are starting to articulate it with different colleagues that they've been working with, is to look at skills for green jobs, okay? Is to look at skills for green jobs and the skills aimed at the requirements of green jobs and this transition towards greening work and move to a more low carbon economy. Then they're looking at green life skills. The skills that we need to actually trying for people to develop much more sustainable attitudes and values and to kind of integrate both adaptive, transformative, and technical purposes. So these green life skills. And then the skills for the green transformation, which is the skills needed to actually address skills needed for an unjust society, the skills needed to transform political and economic structures and actually move us towards a just transition. So this is another conceptualization of green skills. So what I've tried to map is that there are multiple conceptual challenges that hinder the transition to the green transition. Green is notoriously fuzzy. It's used in normative ways, and it makes it very difficult to define its meaning. It's treated as a homogeneous construct without clear differentiation. So it's hard to track. So it's hard to track what it is you're trying to develop, trying to research, or trying to train if it's hard to define. And it remains a socially constructed concept. So it's very contextually developed. It's intangible, and it's often unobservable. So it's very hard to track as its demand remains latent, because we're talking about not a current demand, we're talking about a demand for the future. So it requires us to look at a different future and to be able to understand the skill that's needed for that different future. So that entire scenario has created the kind of conceptual challenges that we are facing. In the next section, Margarita, I hope I'm still okay for time. But I'll keep going.
Yes, there is some time left. Thank you, Prisha. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I want to share with you some of the lessons that we've learned in the research work that we're doing. And some of this is in South Africa, and some of this has been in collaboration with colleagues in different research projects. Is that policies around green jobs and green economy targets need to work with skill policies. And what we found, and the ILO research has shown that, as well as multiple other country-based research studies, there are huge gaps between environmental systems, green economy targets, and skill systems. The gap between them is huge. We're not going to be able to transition to a greener economy without a co-evolution of educational systems and economic and political systems, together with environmental policy systems and a range. So that's one of the first things that we need to look at. We need to not just set green economy or these kind of targets or environmental policy targets. We need to look at the skill system in relation to that. The second point that I would like to raise is that when we think about education programs, we need to think beyond single training interventions or training for a particular group. We need to understand where those people are going to transition to. What's the learning pathway that we're actually creating? What we have found in our research, and we've mapped this with research from in a project now that Simon and myself and colleagues in Uganda are involved in as well, is that largely learning pathways into green jobs, enterprise development, and sustainable job options at these kind of technical levels are unclear, ad hoc, and fragmented. The graph on the right-hand side is from a research project here in South Africa, where we looked at the recent environmental and sustainability-related qualifications. And what you can see on the graph is overwhelmingly the kind of qualifications that are developing linked to environment and sustainability are at NQF level 8 and 9, which means their access points are 7, 8, and 9, which means the access point is postgraduate. So largely, educational systems still view sustainability as something that's postgraduate. It's something that it's a specialism. People will transition into them. So the important issue is, if we're going to be arguing for and building VET programs, we need to understand educational and occupational progression. We need to be able to have a clear idea of what are the intermediate skill occupational families? What are the streams of work that these people are going to transition to? Where are the feeder jobs? How are the jobs related? We have found multiple, and Simon will talk to you about an assessment that we've been doing of some greening TVET programs in Africa. We have found multiple TVET programs that focus, but when we try to trace where are these people going to move to from this job, where's this job going to link to, there's very little attention paid to both either educational progression or occupational progression. Because you need, in order to develop learning pathways, you need both. You need an understanding of how the occupations also progress, and that's what's going to enable people to move. Then the other thing that we found is that in this movement from now into this ideal future that we are all trying, the skills to transition is a slow, long-term endeavor. And it requires multi-level engagement with multiple hidden structures and working with the lock-ins at different levels. But what we have found in our research, it's been extremely important to work at employer level, sector level, and system level. Because you need change. In order to drive change, you need the change at all three levels. So we're engaged in developing research tools to get data on the greening of work at all of these levels. Because you can work with employers, you work with sector organizations, work within sectors, and then you also need to move that into occupational and educational systems. And that's the level of work that's needed in order to try to move the transitions. Sorry. And of course, with that are all the challenges around methodology and how do you research this. And there are multiple issues that have emerged over the last few years, but we can leave that for another session. The point that I wanted to make here, and this is from some of the work that we're doing, is that in order to surface green skills and actually understand the green skills needs in a particular area of work, these are the levels of work that we've had to do. We had to study it from the micro level, from transitioning into work, understanding the stories of people that are doing the work, tracing those stories, understanding supply stories, looking at the qualifications, looking at educational progressions, the pathways, understanding the kind of curriculum that's there. Then we needed to do work to understand the occupational system and the value chains of those sectors. What are the hotspots of the value chain? What are the jobs that are in those hotspots? What's the work that these people are doing? Because what's the group of people that you need in order to transition that hotspot type of work or to actually make a change, okay? Then we had to obviously look at sector, system, and landscape analysis. We've been doing different sector level studies, and then of course the macro level work which is involved. So what is also extremely important in the kind of green skills work as we develop stronger and more transformative VET systems is that we actually need to think about how we're doing this research at different levels. Because we've learned over time, how do we follow this piece of work? What's the next bit of research that we need to add in? Yeah.
Pressure, could I just remind you to please come to an end shortly? Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And thanks, guys. So I just want to say then, I think there's a lot of work that has happened and we've learned a lot in the last few years. And as we frame and reframe VET systems towards sustainability, we need to really think and frame a VET agenda, a sustainability agenda that is strong, deep, and transformative, that moves beyond narrow approaches to sustainability. That a VET agenda that actually takes equity and environmental sustainability objectives into account. And that requires multiple things like a reframing of economy, moving beyond the productivist growth ideas that are central to VET. But many of those things, Simon is going to be picking up, and there are multiple things that have come out of work that we've been busy with. And then I'll leave you with a parting shot. VET has played a critical role in industrializing the world and developing the workforce for industrialized society. David Orr reminds us, the knowledge, skills, aptitude, and values that were necessary to industrialize the earth are not necessarily the same as those that will be needed to heal the earth or to build durable economies and good communities based on principles of equity and sustainability. So let's think carefully, colleagues, as we try to frame a sustainability agenda. I hope I've given you some idea of the kind of complexity around some of the conceptual challenges when researching green skills. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Prisha, for this really eye-opening and thought-provoking introduction to the green skills discourse. I would like to introduce our second keynote speaker to us, Simon McGrath. He is a UNESCO Chair in International Education and Development at the University of Nottingham and Extraordinary Professor at the University of Western Cape. He has worked for more than 25 years on the relationships between education and development, and he has advised many governments and international organizations. He is currently part of the scientific advisory group of the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And Simon will talk to us more in depth about conceptual issues and reflections about vocational education and training and the orthodoxy as we know it. Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Margarita, and thank you to Werner also for making this event happen. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see your slides. Perfect. Thank you.
Right, thanks. I should say, since I did the bio, that I have resigned from FCDO's scientific advisory group. Those of you outside the UK may not have seen that the UK has had a massive cuts to its aid. But we didn't do any advising because we weren't asked. So,
Simon, sorry, I missed a part of your sentence. There was no sound. Could you just repeat what you just said?
Yeah, I was just. Yeah, we have bad weather here at the moment, so hopefully that won't affect us too badly. But we have high winds and rain. Yeah, I have since you got that bio, I've actually resigned from that FCDO role because of in protest over the massive cuts made to development budget and development research. But anyway, so this is a very fast-moving area that we're talking about today. So UNESCO in the ESD conference this week have been talking about these things. Just this morning, I got a paper about VET and the circular economy, which I saw that Ken had been interviewed for. So, things are moving very fast here. So there's a danger of saying things that are out of date by the time they're being said. What I want to do is complement Preach's presentation in some ways by using some other lenses and particularly looking more at VET providers. So I want to suggest that the Anglophone approach. So in the title of the paper of the presentation, it says the VET orthodoxy. So for a German audience, I think, or Germanic audience, I think it's important to say that whilst the Germanic approach, which we'll say simplistically for the moment, is around the dual system, whilst that is perhaps an international gold standard, in most of the South, it's the Anglophone model that has become dominant, which is rather strange in that it neither works theoretically nor works in practice. Then when it comes to being coupled to development thinking, often it's being paired with outdated development theory and policy messages, in a sense very much still linked into program thinking, into top-down development. And so these processes were failing already before we came too late, many of us, to realise the seriousness and urgency of the climate crisis. So we had an approach that wasn't working 10 years ago. It's become increasingly urgent for us to realise that it's not working. So what I want to start off with is being quite provocative. What I want to do, though, however, towards the end of the presentation, is to say, okay, it's one thing to imagine just transitions. As Preacher said, it's a long process, and one of the things we have to do is see about those steps forward. Mark Swilling has a term radical incrementalism. We've got to move incrementally, we've got to move step by step, but we've got to try and think about what of those steps are actually helping to transform rather than just mitigate. And ultimately what we're trying to get is sustainable VET rather than VET for sustainable development, and I'll make clear the distinction later on. So what's wrong with the orthodoxy? A little bit more. So the orthodoxy, as I say, is grounded in an Anglophone view of the world. It's very much linked to Anglophone economics, particularly neoclassical economics, based in rational choice theory, in human capital theory, which tend to view people as individuals who are maximising their utility, maximising their income, who are entirely rational. It downplays the importance of society. It's even worse in understanding the environment. It has a very simplistic model of education, that the only point of education is as an investment. So all these elements of how it understands the world are theoretically flawed, are ideologically loaded. When it comes to VET, in particular, it tends to assume a linear path through education into the world of work that simply isn't true. In the North, many young people have a job whilst they're studying. Many of us return to education. I certainly returned to education after a few years of working in professional practice. Many of us move between education and work, are doing both simultaneously. And the patterns are even more complex in much of the majority world, where people are dropping out of education, coming back in. I had the privilege about 2 years ago to meet some of my former secondary school students. I had taught in rural Zimbabwe. I'd actually taught them about almost 30 years before. And in one case, someone is now a head of department at a university. But his story was of dropping, having to go out of school after O levels, so sort of middle secondary, of working for a while, of going and studying, and constantly moving between study and work and trying to earn income for the next level of study, and finally got his PhD, in his early 40s. So very complex stories that are the realities for many people. But I want to talk about the practical failings here. So what's happened in the dominant view of vocational education training over the last 20 years was a shift from essentially, whilst that neo-classical human capital approach would say we should just let training markets work and we shouldn't intervene, a lot of donors started to think about a range of elements of new public management and how to take that wider reform that was going on in the Anglophone world and try and make the state operate like a business more. And so we have the classic elements of this story. We have qualifications frameworks. We have sector skills councils. We have an injunction that providers should be more driven by industry, that there should be greater industry representation on governing bodies. A whole range of reforms. Funding should change to being more outputs oriented and outcomes oriented over time. The evidence for its success is very, very limited. What we also see in this account, though, is a big ideological argument that if people are not in jobs, it's the fault primarily of the learners themselves, and if not them, of the educational institutions. It's rarely the fault of employers or governments. And linked to this, we've had a language of moving from an assumption that vocational education training is for employment to slippier language about employability, and particularly an Anglophone rather than a continental European understanding of that term, and to entrepreneurship. It's your duty to get a job. And whilst we might want to celebrate entrepreneurship, we have to be very careful that most of the people being celebrated as entrepreneurs are surviving, but they're often surviving with great difficulty. They are not making huge livings for themselves, and they're certainly not employing significant numbers of others. So there's a real danger in this language that we blame failure and we celebrate success far too easily. But I want to then move on to kind of a bigger picture here. And the language I'm going to use here is provocative, deliberately provocative. I want to talk for a minute or two about vocational education training's complicity in unsustainable development. And I want to point to these three elements. I've used the term carbon capitalism. Others talk about fossil capitalism. The notion that, going back to that quote from David Orr, we built the Industrial Revolution on availability of resources like coal and then subsequently oil. We did this by extracting large amounts of natural resources in ways that we cannot sustain. And if you think of the classic vocational educational areas, mining was supported, motors were supported, metals were supported. The whole sort of structure of classical vocational education training was built around the broader economy, understandably. When we go to the south, of course, it was part of a wider process of colonial extractivism. Resources were taken from the south and brought to the north, and the point of vocational education and training was to facilitate that process. In parts of Africa where the climate was suitable for whites, then we had settler economies, as in South Africa, and large amounts of skilling of white working class, male, largely, workers. But in West Africa, where the climate wasn't conducive to settler economies, then there was more emphasis on local skills. And of course, both in that colonial and the post-colonial period, the deficit model that I talked about before has been even more evident. The youth are often seen as a threat. Prisha and I were presenting in Uganda probably about 3 weeks ago now, and there's a presentation which talked about a youth time bomb. And I was struck, apart from the violence of the language, that this is not new language. Back 30 years ago, the Southern African Development Community had a conference at Victoria Falls entitled Diffusing the Youth Time Bomb. If we go back almost 60 years into early years of independence in a number of African countries, we can go back to things like the report of the National Christian Council of Kenya, which set up a village polytechnic movement because they were worried that the youth were going to the city and that they would fall prey to all forms of immoral temptation, and from the state view would be potential political problems. So we've had a long-term problem of placing vocational education and training in particular ways politically, and of course of seeing it as for other people, of seeing it for people who were less able to do academic work, of it being highly gendered, highly racialized, highly class-based. As I say, it then combines in a toxic cocktail with a lot of top-down development. Policies which have failed in countries like England are then being exported to countries where they make even less sense. We're seeing some engagement with sustainable development. Obviously, there are pioneering projects, and Univoc and VVOB will both be able to talk about some, I think, of the very better practice in a short while. But part of the problem with the engagement with sustainable development in the vocational sphere comes from the problem of sustainable development as understood by the SDGs. The SDGs are a political compromise. One of the most problematic parts of the SDGs for me is SDG 8. So if we turn to the indicators of SDG 8, indicator 8.1.1, what is being measured here is annual growth rate of real GDP per annum. So it's a good thing if GDP per annum is growing. Now, obviously you can reject a radical degrowth position, but to talk about unlimited growth is simply unacceptable if we're talking about sustainability. 8.2.1 repeats much of the language, annual growth rate of real GDP per employed person per annum. So a notion of a formal economy that simply isn't there in many of the countries that we're talking about. So I think we need to be thinking much more about what we're talking about. Is it meeting the challenge of skilling for just transitions, as Prisha's set out before? A crucial part of that is work, as she talked about. So what world of work is vocational education and training for anyway? I'm going to use gendered language in this first point. So Guy Standing, whose work will be known to some of you, said, we are no longer in the century of the labouring man. And I apologise for the gendered language, but of course it reflects a gendered structural inequality. An approach to vocational education and training that's still driven by a notion that its graduates are primarily going to go into conventional craft jobs. But actually, in Africa, the vast majority of work is to be found still in informal and subsistence activities, and this is not likely to change radically soon. So we need to think about those kinds of work. We need to think about sustainable livelihoods. Getting beyond that masculine orthodoxy, we need to learn from the feminist economics, with its talk about how work has been gendered and how we can reconceptualise work by thinking about such things as care and provisioning. Prisha made reference to Kate Raworth's work, and we have to think about some of the work that that's engaging with. What will a VET system look like that is working within the planetary boundaries? We can't simply go on producing. We have to think about that we're already exceeding those planetary boundaries. We have to think about the complexity of work, particularly in the northern economies, that many people are working multi-shifts, they have portfolios, all this language about gig economy, 0 hours. The world of work is very, very different from the very structured, very well organised Germanic occupational system. And all, particularly in Anglophone world and particularly in developing countries, what Beruf's concept, what any of these things mean in very different economic situations. I've already talked about the lack of, or the unusualness of linear career pathways. Whilst work can be dignified and affirming, much of it is unjust, indecent and precarious, and intersectional disadvantages writ large in that. Now, at the moment, part of the debate that's going on VET is about the future of work, but it's a problematic part of that. It's the fourth industrial revolution version of this. Now, there are elements of truth in this, but largely it is a management consultant fantasy of how the economy will change in ways that are seen as deeply unproblematic. So there is a real debate going on about what the future of work will be, and that clearly needs to be linked into thinking about what it means to have just, decent and sustainable work and livelihoods. So we can't think just about jobs, we have to think more broadly. So, a couple more elements. What I want to do now is move on into thinking a bit about VET institutions. And Prisha made mention of some of the analytical tools we're trying to use.
Excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah.
Would you mind wrapping up?
Yeah, I think I've got 3 slides I could do very quickly.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
So how far are we getting with greening institutions? Well, we have approaches that largely just try and change the institutional culture around recycling, etc. We have approaches that bring an employable skill into a specific area. That can be things like photovoltaic maintenance. We can move more into generic green skills going into areas like hotel and tourism, about waste management, water management, etc. And sometimes we see the emergence of new whole courses, but we rarely see radical transformation of whole programs. And I want to just, in a couple more slides, just very quickly talk about some of the work that Stephen Sterling has done around analysing education for sustainable development. So what I'm talking about on the previous slide are things that we call bolt-ons. The system itself doesn't really change. The innovations may be welcome, but they're not transformative. So how do we move to building in? How do we develop processes of learning and adapting that change the system? So how do we build from bolt-ons into build-ins to make this truly moving towards a just transition? And then finally, beyond that lies a further stage that would actually be deeply transformative. I'm taking Sterling's language here, which is about education. He says it's not about education for sustainable development, but it's about sustainable education, and I'm adding the V word in there. So if I take Sterling's language, we'd be talking about vocational education not just for sustainability, but being sustainable itself under these 4 headings. Sustaining, So how does vocational education and training sustain people, communities, ecosystems? Is it tenable? So is it working with integrity, inclusiveness? Is it healthy as a system and for the people in it? And is it durable? Will it continue? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for wrapping up so fast in the end. And thank you very much for this provocative speech. I think it's important to be provocative so that we will have enough food for thought and for discussion. Thank you very much. I guess it's now time to have discussions in smaller groups. And we will now start our breakout sessions where you will have the possibility to discuss in smaller groups the two keynotes we have just heard. We have a time slot of about 15 minutes reserved for these small group discussions. And the idea is that you discuss the main issues and aspects that have been presented now in our two keynotes in a view of feeding your discussion results into the panel discussion that will follow after the coffee break. So our suggestion is that each group comes up with one or two or also three statements or questions to feed into the panel discussion after the coffee break. So let us see what the groups have discussed here. So there is a message from group 6. We discussed what can be done now, considering the complexity of the task and difficulties in prescribing tested ways forward. We concluded that changing things right here and now is important, but with a very honest approach in learning and reflecting on what we do. Does it move us closer to a just transition? So this is a message from group 6. Then we have message from group 5. We discussed how we can move from seeing the environment and green agenda as an add-on to inclusive approaches that are instrumental to drive net zero and green transition and transformational processes. Also, we discussed about potential synergies to the digitalization agenda and how this could be harnessed to drive net zero approaches. Thirdly, we discussed about Simon's notion that development cooperation providers still continue to export approaches that have proven ineffective at home, and have asked us how this could be changed. So we'll be trying to answer this question, or at least have some ideas about it. Then we have another group. We did not agree on a statement, so I improvise now. Okay, we hope that this disagreement, which is also very important, will then be discussed during the Q&A session. Dominant learning practices are oriented strongly towards developing entrepreneurial and digital skills. Currently, VET adapts towards a new liberal education agenda rather than preventing further shifts from a capitalist towards a competitive financialized economy. A profound critique would have to question the dominant economization trends in VET, i.e. the very purpose of skills education and the current raison d'etre of VET. The core of the critique might build on new institutionalized learning environments, allowing deep social learning and hence the potential of VET to act as social catalysts, empowering collective and disruptive agency. I would love the panelists to suggest possible safe enough spaces in VET, how to do so. Well, this is a very, very complex intervention. I guess suggesting from this that the discussion in your group was very active. And I do look forward to the Q&A session. But first of all, I do look forward to our panelists and our panel discussion. So let me now introduce our panelists to you. Franz Rauch is a professor at the Institute of Instructional and School Development at the Alpen Adria University in Klagenfurt here in Austria. He has been involved in research and development projects internationally and nationally since many years. He is one of the editors of Educational Action Research Journal and of the journal Arise, and he serves on editorial boards of other journals as well. His areas of research, teaching and publication are education for sustainable development, networks in education, school development, science education, and action research. Thank you for being here, Professor Rauch. Then we have, as a second panelist, Ms. Kenneth Barrientos from UNESCO UNIVOC, the UNESCO Organization on Vocational Education and Training. Ms. Barrientos joined UNIVOC in 2013 as a program officer. As of 2020, she leads and coordinates UNIVOC's SDGs and Greening TVET program. This program aims at strengthening TVET institutional capacities, developing normative guidance, practical implementation tools, and facilitating knowledge sharing and network exchange on the topic. For the past 15 years, Ken has worked in the education and TVET sector. And our third keynote speaker is Ms. Maud Seegers. Maud, would you switch on your camera? Okay, here now we can see you. Thank you very much. Maud is a senior education advisor at VVOB, Education for Development, an international non-profit organization active in the Global South. Ms. Seegers coordinates the educational support to VVOB projects and programs in secondary, technical and vocational education and training. And she has more than 20 years of experience in education and development. So thank you for being with us and sharing your expertise from different angles of the issue that we are debating today. So Professor Rauch, may I start with you, asking you the first question? You're an expert on the education for sustainable development, and you know quite a lot about the state of ESD in Austria. My impression is that in Austria, while at the level of schools and universities, there's quite a bit going on about education for sustainable development and transformative education, but that this is not so much the case at the level of vocational education and training. So we've heard today from Simon that our training system is a well standardized training system, that it's even somehow compared to international gold standard. But so how come that education for sustainable development and transformative education is not so well integrated into VET in Austria?
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. As you said, I'm from the ESD background, but I was also a wall painter first, so I had different experiences also with the labor market as a young man, at least in Austria, of course. And the action research is an important aspect where we have very international critical discourses like knowledge, democracy, etc. But coming back to Austria, I would say what I heard before, I could totally agree. This is the current discourse also in the ESD community, which is now, let's say, becoming much more open to the global discourse. One of a very well-known colleague was mentioned by the second speaker in the ESD community. So these tensions, problems we discussed are there in the more theoretically, let's say, people who are invest time in what is ESD, what are the SDGs, what are the critical components. When it comes to practice, I have to say, a small example, I coordinate with a team, also in cooperation with the ministry, a network on eco schools in Austria, and approximately 10 to 15% of the schools are from the VIT sector. That means commercial technical schools. And as you might know, we have a dual system in Austria for profession, working in an enterprise and going to school partly. And basically, the context in the curricula is not much different to the general education. And basically, I mean, there is not so much research there. You have, like in general education, schools in VIT, they have a focus in ESD and also sometimes reach a critical reflection of economy as such. Also, I agree totally, and experts from the University of Economy in Austria saying this, mainly we have the old model going on worldwide, and this will be a big issue in the future. And there, I think we have this tension of also with new curricula to offer enough space to critique and reflect the whole system more deeply with young people, yeah, that they even get some kind of this thinking in the horizon. And young people help us. When I think on Friday for Future or other movements or transition movement or at the university, I work a lot with students who have a university garden where we reflect community learning. So my impression is, and I'm now 30, 40 years at university, the new generation of students, there are more now than maybe 10, 15 years ago. They're real interested in making a change, making a difference. So there I see small, let's say, maybe seeds, but in general, it will be a big question if we have the context that this kind of thinking can flourish enough. So as I heard before, the small steps, yeah, this is a real danger when we lose the goal. Yeah. On the other hand, when we are too radical and we do not move this concept in the center of society, it's also problematic that we have maybe a lot of conflicts, but not enough development, yeah, and not taking people with us, you know, and this is a tension. And I hope positively seeing that the post-COVID development might offer some new space, yeah, in this orientation we heard in the morning. But I think this is something we have to do. But in general, I would say VIT is not less, let's say, schools are not dealing less with this issue than other schools. Yeah, in Austria. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, I think you mentioned an important reflection that we all have to make, how to balance the fact that we have to take small steps, but we could lose our main goal, and not to fall into the too radical language, so not to be able to enter the center of society. So this is something in this topic I think is particularly important. Maybe there will be the possibility to reflect on that later as well. Ms. Barrientos, can I ask the second question to you? So we've heard the example of Austria, a country with a long and strong tradition in vocational education and training, but apparently still much to do in terms of transforming vocational education towards a tool for sustainable development, or towards a sustainable VT, as Simon said earlier. You, as an expert at UNESCO Univerc, you have quite a global view on how things are moving in the VT sector globally. So could you give us some insight into the state of VT globally in terms of contributing to green and just transitions? Are there any good examples or best practices, or what would you say are the main obstacles? And are there any major differences between the global south and the north in terms of challenges?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Margarita. So good afternoon, good evening, colleagues who are joining here today. To answer Margarita's questions, I have prepared some slides just to also give us some indication of where we are coming from in regard to my comments. So I'm very happy to join today, and my contribution is primarily based on the analysis that we made preparing the publication called, next slide please, Skills Development and Climate Change Action Plans, Enhancing Tibet's Contribution. So you can see that in the next slide. Please. Yes. So the development of this study was basically prepared with the help of our consultant, Ms. Uspala Salkampani. And our intention is to basically make sure that our Tibet stakeholders are not lagging behind when it comes to tackling the issues of climate change, and the whole concept of sustainability is well integrated and nested in the conceptualization of how Tibet is going to respond to the demands of climate change. So you asked Margarita about the challenges, the obstacles that we are seeing. So I will focus on the challenges at the level of policy and practice. While citing them, I will also try to share some examples of the strategies at the policy and practice level that we are observing in the countries and how they are addressing them. So we looked at about 155 INDCs, so the intended nationally determined contributions, as a sample. It's a sample group for the purpose of understanding the priorities and the extent of the planned engagement or participation of TVET in implementing the plans of action. And here we specifically focus on the adaptation components, which, as we know, is premised on the concrete actions that countries are undertaking to change processes, practices, and structures that can reduce their vulnerability to the impacts of climate change that's happening now. These actions demand new ways of operations and therefore new skills. So I consider this discussion very important because this is what we are talking about. When we say Tibet needs to integrate sustainability, we should start now because there are a lot of things happening and jobs are evolving, and we have to be able to respond in a timely manner. So what I did was to cluster some of the issues that we observed in the various plans and communication documents that we reviewed, and then group them under the two key challenges that you can see in the slide. So first is the low level of capacity at different levels of decision-making pyramid. So this is one problem that we are seeing. And the second one is the still fairly low level of information flow and knowledge acquired to consider a systematic education response. So focusing on these two, we see a potential bottleneck in creating skills response that can accelerate the green transition. First bullet point, it's a common challenge is a lack of the knowledge and the skills at the government level in designing and assessing adaptation projects. And here we are looking at the abilities to create flagship initiatives that can influence critical changes in processes, practices, and structures that help countries reduce their vulnerability. Second to the list is another challenge that points on the need for the management and decision-making levels of companies to incorporate climate knowledge in business decisions or adopt strategies to apply concepts like circular approach to stretch the lifetime of products, for example, through repairs or remanufacturing, or for example, the use of resources that reduce biodiversity loss. So this we can say much about the business sector and also the things that are serving as bottlenecks for them to respond. But even though there are some issues like this, we are also seeing some good examples. And this week, UNESCO organized an Education for Sustainable Development conference, and we launched the ESD 2030 roadmap to provide where we are learning from small and medium-sized enterprise working with multinational companies on food packaging solutions or closing the production loop that used to be linear to conserve resources and avoid waste. So these are just examples that even though we see a lot of issues still going on in the business sector and how they are responding to the whole demands of lowering their carbon emissions, there are good examples that we can take inspiration from. Third bullet, interlink and impart climate knowledge. So Prisha rightly pointed out earlier in her presentation that there is a fuzzy notion on green skills that's going on. And this fourth challenge in the list perhaps reinforced this message. Educators have the need to interlink and impart knowledge in cross-cutting areas, which requires upskilling and updating of knowledge and competencies of the teachers and trainers themselves regarding climate change or green transitions, to be able to make the connections between what they should teach and what job practices are evolving in the market-based transition. So it's important that they also know what's happening in the labor market. And this is something that is going very slowly, as has been indicated during the ESD conference. We had a session on ESD in Tibet, where we tried to see how Tibet is in mainstreaming and implementing excuse me, ESD in their classroom and in their practices. And there are fairly good practices, but still we need to learn from a lot more. But in Finland, from the study, what we are seeing is that there's a momentum in making the interconnection and links. So climate change issues are included in education. Many school subjects are now dealing with sustainable development and climate change, and they're also addressing climate change in a cross-curricular theme. In addition, beyond the basic education level, climate change issues are included in upper secondary curricula. So I think this is another source of inspiration for us, and we can take a lot of good lessons from the Finnish experience. Another example we found was in Jamaica, where it also shows that they are currently engaged in reorienting Tibet to support SDGs. So there are different levels of appreciation and manners of integrating sustainability, and definitely we have to see the country context, why they are choosing the way they are choosing to do this. Fourth, when it comes to professional level challenges, workers will need to apply their knowledge in their day-to-day practices. So this is a challenge when we are not seeing the push for businesses to embrace sustainability, and therefore the workers are not also being required to do the same. But again, if we look at examples, we see something relevant in Seychelles. Many government and civil society partners in Seychelles are contributing to climate change education program, targeting schools, the general public, artists, professionals, so the whole creative industry. Although Tibet's participation in this drive is not systematically reflected in the plans that are available, Tibet institutions are already undertaking ground-level activities on climate change adaptation. Last but not the least, earlier Prish talked about having different strategies for the blue economy and the green economy in South Africa. And I think this remark echoes what we are seeing as a pattern in many countries, where making coherent policy is not always easy. So the study that we did also saw that with the government of South Africa playing a key role in building skills for national development, it has also recognized that there is a need to build the necessary institutional capacity for climate change response planning and implementation. And it has reflected this in the plans, and hopefully we can see some progress in implementation later on. Another example, in Seychelles, they have been engaged in establishing a Blue Economy Research Institute. So this is, I think, under the auspices of the University of Seychelles. And this is one of the ways for which Seychelles is trying to focus on climate change related researches. And this is something they want to strengthen further moving forward. So I'm moving on to the second cluster of challenges. First, so this I clustered under the need for wider dissemination of climate change and adaptation information to connect with education response. And the first challenge is in making information accessible to local and national institutions, government agencies, non-government organizations, urban and rural communities, and other stakeholders. So Austria, I think from our review, Austria has established web portals, making sure that they are quite advanced in this area in order to raise awareness and involve the general public in climate decision making. Of course, you are the best person, those who are in the industry in Austria, to confirm whether this is working well. In contrast, the documentation review in countries like Kenya says that there is still a long way to go in terms of having a general access to information on awareness and the integration of climate change adaptation. So it's still a challenge for Kenya, but hopefully this will be also addressed soon. Last bullet point, there is a challenge in the fact that identifying specific skills development and training requirements for climate change adaptation remains unfocused. In the study, we can see some countries engaging in this task when there is a clear conceptualization of how they can move into green economy transition. And some examples we saw, of course, in Germany, in Brazil, specifically in Brazil, there is this organization called the National Program for Access to Technical Education and Employment, and they have the ambition to improve the professional qualifications among recyclable material collectors, so those who collect recycling materials, and to recognize the latent skills of these professionals. And so they are trying to initiate some action to develop further their knowledge and make them enhance their capabilities in social technology applications. So next slide, please. This is the last.
Okay.
Yes. So I will just give you a snapshot. So the publication in the next slide offer some considerations for action, and if you go to the link that I provided in the first slide, you will be able to see. So this proposed action is basically giving possible considerations that different stakeholders can take at different levels of responsibilities. So yeah, this is for my end what I can share today. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Ms. Barrientos, for this important insight about the state of policies and practices in VET. At the global level, we can see that there are quite a lot of challenges in many countries, and that there are also good examples, but my impression is rather fragmented. So we'll go back to a topic which was already mentioned earlier, the question of how development cooperation is contributing or can contribute to vocational education and sustainable development. Ms. Segas, you are an expert on VET and education in development cooperation. And as we've heard earlier from Simon and also Prisha, that most policies are still kind of continuing in the framework of what was called an unsustainable development. So what is your view on the main challenges to overcome this and to build a real contributive development cooperation in the sector of VET?
So thank you, Margarita, for the invitation. And yeah, it's always a bit of a challenge to speak when so many have passed before you, but here goes. So I've been asked to look at the question of transforming TVET systems from the perspective of development cooperation. I think Jonas will be sharing my slides. So for full disclosure, VVOB is a Belgian non-profit. We work in 9 countries in the Global South. We always work hand in hand with ministries of education to strengthen systems for teacher professional development and school leadership development in 4 education subsectors, including secondary TVET. In terms of funding, we are fully reliant on donor funding, so both public funders as well as private foundations. And the advantage that VVOB may have as a Belgian actor is that we don't have a TVET system to export. And so that puts us in a position to find solutions together with our partners. You can move to the next slide, Jonas. So to start, I would make a note on money as a measure of my optimism about the contribution that development cooperation can make to transforming TVET systems. You can move on, Jonas. So my optimism is perhaps more skepticism a little bit if when I look at the financing issue, which was also raised by Walter in the chat. So of course we cannot reduce development cooperation to financing. That's a little bit brutal, but money does talk. And what do we see? So in 2019, and that was pre-COVID, the OECD DAC countries, the total ODA, so the official development assistance was equivalent to 0.3% of the combined gross national income. And only 5 DAC members met or exceeded the famous 0.7% target in that same year. So in 2019, ODA did rise in 18 countries, and Austria was one of the ones with the largest increases among a few others. And when we look at the total gross disbursements and we compare them, so we compare the 5, and you can move, I think you can move to the next slide. We compare the 5 years before and since the SDGs and the years for which data are available, we can see the following. And I made this comparison because one might expect that the SDGs made a real difference in the kind of funding that would go, for example, to TVET, whereas previously we had a paradigm of strongly focusing on basic education. The SDGs have clearly opened up the spectrum or the potential spectrum for finance and also for the priorities that are put in general. So when we compare those two periods, what do we see? In absolute numbers, the ODA cake has grown. In absolute numbers, the slice for education has also grown, but the slice in terms of the share, the slice for education has become smaller. There is good news for TVET though. So within the total for education, the slice for TVET has grown, as has its share, and in total ODA, the share for TVET has also increased. But, and we can move to the next slide. When we, so that optimism of the growing slice is quite relative, in fact, when we compare the share that goes to TVET to other funding lines of ODA. For example, the funding that goes to the production sectors, or indeed the funding that goes to purely the administrative side of development cooperation. Of course, this amount of funding is, well, it is an issue, and it is a real constraint, I think, to the contribution that development cooperation can make to transforming TVET systems. It's necessary to look at the priorities on the agenda for the findings that the financing that is there or that may become available. And the top challenge, and I would definitely echo what has been said before, the top challenge is really linking the agendas for green economy and just transitions with the agenda for TVET and that of skilling, and developing a truly shared agenda and common goals. So by and large, this link is not being made, even at the level of discourse. And at least, and there we could think that ideas developing and putting these and communicating these and making it clear precedes or becomes a real sign of commitment and action that will follow. So to brighten up a lockdown evening, and you can move to the next slide, Jonas. What I did was I did a Twitter search or a Twitter scan for a number of terms or a number of hashtags. I looked for green skills, skills for change, green economy, just transition, youth employment, and I checked whether those appear in the communications of major donors as well as UN and development agencies. And to be sure, I also did a scan of the Twitter accounts of 7 multilaterals and 11 bilaterals, of which 10 European, and 3 of those 11 were from Belgium because I was really curious about it as well. I scanned back to April 22 this year, because you would think that Earth Day is a nice symbolic occasion to communicate about green skills. And what you see on this slide and on the next slide, we'll move to it in a little bit, is what I found. And it is all that I found. And that harvest, so the harvest that you will see on this, that you can see on this slide and on this, the previous slide and on this particular slide, is quite in line with what was highlighted in the policy analysis in the briefing paper that accompanies this webinar. So multilaterals are more so they more frequently establish the link between skilling or TVET and green jobs, green economies, green and inclusive growth. Admittedly, the language differs. The EU and its related agencies are taking a leap forward, and ILO and UNESCO Univoc are and remain committed advocates of this agenda. Few bilaterals make an explicit link, In fact, the two examples that I found were GIZ and the Austrian Development Corporation. In those few communications, no specific attention is paid to what the green skills agenda could mean for the most vulnerable, whose livelihoods may very well be intertwined with brown or carbon economies, or who don't have access to green TVET or on-the-job training in greening enterprises. And what the slides didn't show, but what I did also find, is that it stands in quite a bit of contrast with other communications. So many of these agencies communicate fairly frequently on green economy, circular economy, green growth in general. They want to green specific sectors like agriculture or specific agricultural value chain, waste management, refrigeration, etc. But what it means is that when it comes to greening, right now, the focus is still very much on the production side. The same agencies also pay actually considerable attention to equity, and especially gender equity in education more generally, or in other subsectors of education. There seems to be, in a way, an assumption that TVET is per definition almost for the vulnerable, and that the matter then requires little further attention, even though in reality what we see is that TVET is often an expensive option for the most vulnerable, and in many cases one does not necessarily offer them a lot of perspective after studying or for real sustainable livelihoods. Now, this silo thinking that we see in donor countries, we also see it in the policies of our partner governments as well. So for us as VVOB, we rely normally on the frameworks that our partner governments and our partner ministries of education offer, and we fit our work around that and help to implement the policies that our partners have in place. But when it comes to this particular matter of sustainable TVET, those frameworks actually offer not so much guidance. So a lot of the challenge is figuring it out and figuring it out together with your partners, what the focus will be exactly. So what do I take from it? And that's again from the perspective of a medium-sized implementing organization, where from a country whose donors and bilateral agency did not feature on those previous slides, my priority would be this. At home, we need to get both green and just transitions as well as TVET higher on the agenda and advocate strongly for the integration of these agendas. For advocacy, it seems that the spaces that are being opened up by the EU will be the most powerful, because the EU is at least trying to converge bilaterals around a Team Europe agenda that at least currently is greener than what we see bilaterally. It's time for action also. There are many uncertainties and unclear concepts, and but nevertheless, in our next funding cycle, and for VVOB, that would start in 2022, at least for the Belgian funding, we want to see demonstrably more of our programs that focus on skilling for green and just transitions. Admittedly, that will come at a cost of getting it quite right now, because as we also heard from other speakers, the concepts will continue to be contested, our understanding will continue to evolve, and strong coalitions for deep transformation of economies, education, and TVET remain to be formed or strengthened. But moving forward, even imperfectly, is becoming a matter of urgency for VVOB. So what can donors do to facilitate and to support implementers who have similar ideas? And we can move to the next slide, or even the next one. The possible strategies cause for.
Can I just ask you to wrap up, because we're behind schedule a bit, and I guess that our audience would like to participate in the discussion.
Yes, sorry. So what should I highlight? I think on the donor country government side, I would definitely highlight more ambition at home, both in terms of climate action and in terms of ODA. Donor country governments need to practice what they preach, and things need to change in the north. And I think when supporting partner countries and implementers, cross-sectoral approaches and positive incentives to stimulate those would be very helpful. From the implementer side, so for organizations such as VVOB, what the key I think that I ultimately want to say is that we need to maintain focus or shift focus. In the case of VVOB, it's maintaining focus on the characteristics of inclusive quality TVET while we go through this transition and focusing more on sustainable TVET. So for us, that means that educating for a narrow skill set and including specific green skills at the top of that pyramid that was shown before, it's ultimately not helpful because it can lock young people into jobs that either disappear or that do not actually emerge, despite lots of discussions around the emerging green economy. And secondly, the quality of TVET, as that of other subsectors, relies on quality frontline implementers. So that is teachers and trainers in formal and informal TVET. So support systems need to be put in place to get them on board. So far.
Okay, thank you very much. I got the impression that all in all, you confirmed that there is still much fragmentation at the policy level, both in donor countries and in the partner countries, and that we need to overcome, as you said, silo thinking on both sides, from at home, as you call it, but also in our partner countries in development cooperation. So thank you very much to our panelists. The floor is now open to the audience. You're invited to participate, to ask questions, to make comments. Mr. Temel, would you like to ask a question, please?
Yes, hello, and good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for all these contributions and a very interesting discussion. One question that came to my mind was we heard a lot about VET and VET orthodoxy, which refers to the formal VET and the formal education system that we all in some way try to reform and improve. But talking about the global south, we also talk about a lot of picture of the informal economy. So I wanted to raise the question that shouldn't we also focus a lot on informal economy in the sense of creating livelihoods, sustainable sources of income for people with non-linear education participation and also for skills that are useful to create that kind of livelihood in the informal economy, which is likely to grow in the total share. So reforming the formal system is one thing, but then also looking at the informal system is another thing. And is there not also a huge potential that should be tapped?
Okay, thank you very much. There was a second raised hand. Mrs. Katharina Jaik, I guess, was this hand. Would you like to take the floor?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with Matthias' question. And also I would be interested, how can we make sure that in informal apprenticeships that are very common in Western Africa, for example, but also in parts of Asia and Africa as a whole, Latin America, how can we make sure that that we can integrate green skills or greening also there? That's very much connected to what Matthias already said. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we take these two questions by now? Maud, would you like to answer this? And also Prita and Simon, if you wish, and anyone who would like to take these questions.
Well, I'm not sure if it's maybe more a reflection than a strong answer, but VVOB as an organization, we focus on formal TVET. So I can't really comment on how to best strengthen informal apprenticeship systems, but formal TVET also prepares youth for the informal economy. It is not, I don't think there is an assumption that formal schooling leads to formal jobs in most of the countries where we work, even higher middle income countries. This is a reality. I personally would not make that distinction. What we see in or the kinds of systems that we work in, and a trend that we also support, is when governments look for easier bridges and ladders between different education systems. So for example, in Uganda, there is what is called an informal TVET system that is run by the Directorate for Industrial Training, focuses more on shorter skilling. This shorter skilling is officially recognized, and young people can move quite easily between that shorter skilling and move back into longer term TVET programs. And the TVET programs even have modules or courses included that will also qualify them in that informal system, which is actually quite recognized by employers. So it is, from a system side, flexible and favorable, I think, to young people.
Okay, Simon.
Yeah, following on from Maud, I think absolutely sustainable livelihoods have to be a major part of this. I'll say one negative thing and one positive thing. Just had a doctoral student finish a thesis, Ghanaian student finish work on skills in the traditional apprenticeship system in Ghana, a very well developed, large system. She wasn't looking at green issues, but health and safety was one of her focuses. And there was a real problem with cultures of health and safety that many of the young people were saying, I know about wearing a mask while I'm paint spraying. I know about minimizing the amount of oil I should, get smeared on me, but that's not the culture. And there's only so much we can do as apprentices. So I think then there's a big program of work to be done up the system about changing those cultures of learning and working, so that young people often do have the knowledge. And I think one of our problems is often it's not about knowledge. It's about cultures that prevent the knowledge being applied. So that's kind of the more negative, and the need to work on it. Yeah, we're also working in Uganda around informal sector, but I want to go to work that we're doing, and VVOB's working in similar space around agricultural education. And at the moment we're working with a series of institutions in South Africa, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. And one of the challenges here is taking, say, agricultural colleges that have been producing people again for the wrong jobs, and trying to work with them around how they can focus more on being water wise in particular, but focusing more on the realities of the economy that those graduates are going to go to. And I think there's some interesting work going on there. I know VVOB are also involved in work in Latin America as well in this space of trying to work with the agricultural sector as a key one in terms of responding to the climate.
Okay, thank you. Can we maybe also switch to the first question I introduced earlier, the question about a different topic a little bit, how to open up or to provide spaces within the teaching of VET, to open them up for new forms of learning. Would anyone like to reply to this one? Professor Rauch, maybe?
Yeah, maybe a short comment. So my experience is nationally and internationally that some kind of, let's say, ideas of a network which has some support from, let's say, top-down levels, be it states or be it other bodies, and brings together people who are real, let's say, in my thing, in schools or also in enterprises, or people who are from the workforce. And when you have this kind of, let's say, spaces, they offer developing ideas and developing strengths, developing influence in a society. This might be a step to have this movement from, let's say, single initiatives, yeah, and sometimes they are important. And I know in every field you have it, and as the colleague from UNESCO reported it, but how to bring these lighthouses or also best practice has its challenges, because when it is so good, it might also keep, let's say, motivation. It does not motivate people, but they say it is a very special situation. So we talk more about from common practice, examples which could work. And when you connect this, let's say, single initiatives of different levels, that might offer some kind of, let's say, energy and impetus. And you might use now the frame conditions, which our discourse is saying, a lot of examples, possibilities, yeah, maybe spaces which are now open. And I would say this might be one idea to move from the single to the, let's say, community level. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Anyone else who would like to comment on this? Yes, Maud, please.
So one of the models for teacher professional development that VVOB works with in Ecuador, among other countries, is professional learning communities for teachers and school leaders as well. And these are cross-school communities that are often facilitated by somebody from a deconcentrated level or a mid-tier education, the district education officer, for example. And those spaces, we can, if the coaches or the facilitators are well trained, they can actually act as safe spaces where educators and school leaders can, in a way, often resist the system, which is often what actually needs to happen in a way. Teachers and school leaders are under a lot of pressure to function within examination-based systems, at least in the countries where we work, which don't give a lot of space always for creativity. And what you see in these learning communities, when sufficient trust has been built, schools and teachers and school leaders really do exchange real experience, ways of teaching a curriculum or interpreting it, enriching it, and teaching it in a way that that can be innovative.
Okay, thank you. Kenneth, would you like to comment on this as well?
Yes, thank you. Those are good questions. But this question also reminds me of two examples. So I'm responding on the different learning spaces and how we bring learning on about and for sustainability in different ways. And also an earlier question about how do we bring in the concept of informal apprenticeship and strengthen informal apprenticeship while we are already talking about new modes of learning. So we are working with Univoc centers. We have a network of over 250 Univoc centers, which are basically ministries, TVET institutions, universities, research, and also training bodies. And we are seeing some some good examples from this network, and one of them was in Paraguay. So they have this, when we talk about different learning mode, in Paraguay, they have what they call self-sufficient schools. And in here, one of the examples is the Fundación Paraguay, where they kind of integrate learning into the social responsibility and role of students living with their families and living within communities, so they can provide for themselves and for the community a very practical services that can enable the community to live on a day-to-day basis in a self-sufficient manner, but also allow the kids, the young learners to also learn the social aspects of their role in the community, as well as learn new skills, sustainability skills, for example, focusing on agriculture, farming. So they have this very unique model where they are even implementing some traffic light system where they try to measure the improvements in the learning process of the kids living within this community. So this might be a good example that you might wish to learn a bit. Maybe I can share with you some links to see how the practice looks like. It's not very intimidating, as what Professor Franz was mentioning earlier. There are some very good projects that you are afraid that they cannot be replicated because they are too perfect in character, and perhaps they are well funded, but there are very good examples that we can see. Another example that I encounter is on the green apprenticeship in Seychelles again. Sorry, I keep on mentioning Seychelles because they're really very hardworking and very good in what they're doing. So we have also a UNIVOC center called the Seychelles Institute of Technology. And what they do is to train the young students who are I think in the field of plumbing, and they engage with NGO. They help the NGO provide apprenticeship training for these young kids. And these young kids, so I don't know how we call it, formal and informal. So they are working together and helping the community to create something where the learners can provide for the community, can learn new skills about how to conserve water, how to build water tanks, and how to service the community through repairs and all these things. So I think this is, again, a very good model of when you integrate sustainability into the training and you try to fill in with those new ways of learning and a very practical solution to learn and acquire new skills and again serve the community. This can really give a very good meaning to us integrating sustainability in VET, because VET is very practical and very it should be also service oriented to go to the direction of community and show them good examples of how to create new livelihoods, how to acquire new skills, and also how to contribute to the sustainability of the community.
Thank you very much. So I see that we are also already behind schedule. I would like to ask a short and final question to all our panelists and also our keynote speakers, just in a way to sum up and to wrap up and maybe give some notes about the way forward to this important issue. There was a question from group 5, which I would like to maybe adapt a little bit, mentioning that development cooperation providers still continue to export approaches that have proven ineffective and at home, and this group asked themselves how this could be changed. So let me ask a last question to all of you, adapting this a little bit. How can we all contribute to the fact to make these two agendas between TVET and sustainable development, just and green transitions? How can we all work together to make this integration happen? Just very short answers to point to a way forward.
And I think it's such a huge question, but if I think about, I think multiple, across all the speakers, they've hinted at different ideas of coherence. So if I had to choose one word, I would look at kind of systemic coherence, and I know that there are different parts of the system, and I'm using the word system at multiple levels, and actually trying to understand what the lock-ins are in the system and how to dismantle those lock-ins at different levels of the system, and to celebrate the niche, the kind of small niche level innovations that are happening, because they are important and radical kind of innovations that are happening. And I wanted to share to the question that you're asking about learning, because I mean, we're working with this idea in one of our, Simon kind of alluded to it, around learning networks, where we've put colleges, universities, communities together in a learning network, and together they're working to make changes in their community through a formal learning program. So each one is involved in a formal program, and they all are contributing towards productive demonstration sites in their communities. And in their formal learning programs, they are involved in change projects. So these little, to celebrate the small wins, work against the lock-ins, understand what the lock-ins are, and work for coherence, if you want some starting points.
Yes, perfect. So celebrate the little steps, dismantle the lock-in. Simon, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think linking to that, it's about learning, and partly the challenge is the obstacles to learning, and scale, I think, is part of that in the bigger agency. So I think, the VVOBs, the Austrian aids, are in a better position in some ways to be learning organisations. And I remember examining many years ago a doctorate from a VVOB staff member whose name I forget now, who was working on being a learning organisation. Whereas some of the big agencies, it's just about moving the money. And frankly, that's all that matters to them. And so I think being in a space where you can afford to learn, I think Maud said something about these are wicked problems. We shouldn't expect to succeed every time. But the problem in some organisations is you can't fail once.
Okay, thank you very much. Maud, would you like to add something to that?
I think the word that comes to mind for me is partnerships. It's very important, I think, that for us as an implementer or other organizations, you really look at what is your core business, what are you good at, strengthen it, and work together with others who complement you, like-minded organizations that complement you. To not stretch yourself too thin. The common agenda will come because there is a common thinking, and this happens because people sit together, work together, and struggle sometimes through problems together.
Okay, Professor Rauch, any more suggestions?
Yeah, I think I agree totally. Maybe I add local, regional, and maybe also universities might become more open and support this structure. So they have the different layers of society, and what a colleague from South Africa is saying also, I think this is a very, very, let's say, to have the experience that it makes a difference, that these initiatives make real a difference to the life of the people, and when they are also connected to some kind of educational settings and institutions, so that they support the reflection on it, yeah. In this, let's say, concrete examples they work on, yeah, or the things they want to develop in VIT now, that this might make a momentum which makes it easier that the thing can develop further, and also strengthen people. Yeah, education has one goal to give, let's say, the open horizons and to strengthen people who are maybe, especially in these areas we're talking about, have the feeling not being so, let's say, able to have decisions on their own, being more externally ruled, things like this. I mean, there is where education comes in. I think it's important. Connect these two.
Thank you very much. So strengthening people and trying to create momentum and to capitalize on momentum. Ken, would you like to have the last word on this and add something to this points.
Yes, thank you very much. And I totally agree with all the inputs provided. Maybe I can just do some promotional thing here as I close. And the word that I can think of is, of course, be familiar with the roadmap, because the roadmap is something that kind of puts us in line together. And I believe we are seeing a lot of fragmentation because we don't even know what our roadmap is. And to this note, I want to share UNESCO's ESD 2030 roadmap. And I think these already help identify where Tibet can play its role. And you can see in different priority actions how Tibet can foster partnership, how Tibet can foster the community engagement. And I invite you all to please be familiar with the roadmap. I think it's a very helpful tool for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good recommendation to finalize. And so the last the last initiative I would like to invite you to is to give us some feedback on today's discussion, and to comment on the question, what was the most interesting insight that you have learned today? Work towards policy coherence and a common roadmap. Work in the context and harmonize. Don't export a failing system. Well, this is a good one. Wage concepts, fragmentation, and green vet and green economic development have to go together and not being looked at in an isolated way. Increase complexity. This is always important in our thinking. Strengthen networks. Great. I guess we all look at the skills and livelihoods systems at the same time. Thank you very much. Well, I will now have to close this very interesting session. I would like to thank all of you, especially, of course, our keynote speakers, Prisha and Simon, and of course, our panelists, Professor Franz Rauch, Kenneth Barrientos, and Maud Siegers, for your very illuminating and interesting speeches and provocative speeches. I think provocation is one of the most important things we can do so that people have a possibility to think out of the box. And of course, I would like also to thank the audience for participating. And I hope that this was only the first session or the first meeting and that we can get together and continue to discuss this very important issue. And I have the feeling that we are only at the beginning of an important process of transforming education and Tibet and contributing to transitions, to green and just transitions. So thank you all very much for this interesting evening, and I hope we stay in touch, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Bye-bye. Bye.